The appointment judge Regina Thomas stood at her office window in the Interplanetary High Court building, looking at the busy skyways of New Washington. Flying cars and transport pods moved in neat lines between the tall buildings. The year 2157 had brought many changes to Earth, but the basics of law and justice stayed the same. Her new office showed her recent rise in power. The walls were covered with real wood panels, something very rare these days. Her degrees and awards hung in simple frames, telling the story of her 20-year climb from a small court in Atlanta to the most powerful legal position in the solar system. A soft beep from her desk computer broke her thoughts. Her assistant's voice came through clearly. "Judge Thomas, the president's office is calling about the Sterling case." Regina took a deep breath and smoothed her black robes. "Put them through," she said, sitting down at her desk. The large screen on her wall lit up, showing the president's chief of staff. "Judge Thomas," the man said, his face serious. "We need to talk about tomorrow's hearing." "Mr. Parker, my court schedule is not up for discussion," Regina replied firmly. Her voice was calm but strong, just like when she handled tough cases in her early days. "This isn't about scheduling," Parker said, rubbing his forehead. "It's about Marcus Sterling himself. He's difficult. The last 3 judges who tried to regulate his business either quit or asked to be removed from his cases." Regina's expression didn't change. "Are you suggesting I should be scared of a businessman?" "Sterling isn't just any businessman," Parker warned. "He owns most of the space travel industry. His company controls nearly all travel between Earth, Mars, and the Moon. He has more money than some countries." "The law doesn't care about bank accounts, Mr. Parker," Regina said. She stood up, her tall figure casting a shadow in the evening light. "Whether someone has $10 or 10 trillion, they must follow the same rules." Parker looked uncomfortable. "Judge Thomas, Sterling's lawyers are already trying to have you removed. They say you're biased against successful business leaders." Regina almost laughed. "They mean I'm biased because I'm black, female, or both?" She shook her head. "Those tricks might have worked 50 years ago, but not anymore. Not in my court. The president just wants to make sure you understand what you're getting into," Parker said quickly. "Sterling has friends in high places." "So do I," Regina answered, touching the small silver scales of justice pin on her robe. It had belonged to her grandmother, who had also been a judge. "Mine are just higher up the law itself." After ending the call, Regina walked back to the window. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and purple. Far above, she could see the faint line of a space elevator, carrying cargo and passengers to the orbital stations. All of it controlled by Sterling Industries. "Time to remind people that nobody is above the law," she whispered to herself. "Not even the man who owns the sky." She picked up the case file from her desk. The charges against Sterling were serious: monopoly violations, safety regulation breaches, illegal suppression of competing technologies. But the worst was how he treated the Mars colonies, cutting off their transport services when they couldn't pay his increasing prices. Tomorrow would be interesting. Sterling probably expected another judge he could scare or buy off. Instead, he would meet someone who had fought against bullies her whole life, someone who had earned every step up the ladder with hard work and dedication to justice. Regina smiled slightly as she gathered her things to head home. Let Sterling bring his army of lawyers and his mountain of money. In her courtroom, only the truth mattered. And the truth, like justice, didn't care how rich you were. She had a feeling that tomorrow would be a day Marcus Sterling would never forget. The confrontation the courthouse plaza fell silent as Marcus Sterling's private shuttle descended from the morning sky. It was sleek, silver, and worth more than what most people earned in 10 years. The craft's engines barely made a sound as it landed on the designated pad. Security drones buzzed around the area, their red lights blinking as they scanned for threats. The regular police officers stood straight, trying to look professional in front of the richest man on Earth. The shuttle's door opened with a soft hiss. Marcus Sterling stepped out, wearing a suit that seemed to change color in the sunlight. He was tall and thin, with gray hair cut perfectly short. His face showed no expression as he looked at the courthouse building. "Mr. Sterling," a court official said, stepping forward with a tablet. "You need to sign in and go through security like everyone else." Sterling didn't even look at him. "My lawyers will handle that." He walked past the official, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. 4 men in expensive suits hurried after him, carrying black briefcases. Inside the courthouse, people moved out of his way. Some looked scared, others angry. Everyone knew who he was. His face appeared on news screens every day, usually talking about his latest space project or buying another company. Judge Thomas watched all this on the security feeds in her office. She noticed how Sterling ignored the basic rules, how he acted like he owned the place. "Just another day in court," she muttered, putting on her robe. The courtroom was already full when Sterling arrived. Reporters sat in the back with their cameras off. No recording was allowed. The public seats held protesters and supporters alike, all watching Sterling walk to his table. Regina entered through the judge's door. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Everyone stood up, everyone except Sterling, who kept checking something on his wrist computer. "Mr. Sterling," Regina said, her voice clear and firm. "In this courtroom, we show respect for the law by standing when asked. Please join us." Sterling looked up slowly. For a moment, he seemed surprised to see a black woman in the judge's chair. Then he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Your Honor." He stood up, moving like it was all a big joke. "The case of Earth Government versus Sterling Industries will now begin," Regina announced. She looked directly at Sterling. "The charges are serious, Mr. Sterling. Monopoly violations, endangering colonial citizens, illegal suppression of competition." "How do you plead?" Sterling's lawyer started to stand, but Sterling pulled him back down. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "this court has no right to judge my business practices. Space isn't bound by Earth laws." Regina raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Then perhaps you'd like to give up your Earth citizenship? Stop using Earth space stations? Remove your company from Earth's stock market?" The room got very quiet. Sterling's face turned slightly red. One of his lawyers whispered something to him, but he waved the man away. "I've read your history, Judge Thomas," Sterling said. "Small cases in Atlanta. City court in Washington. What do you know about running a space transport empire? This is not a business meeting, Mr. Sterling. This is a court of law." Regina's voice could have frozen water. "And in my court, we deal with evidence, not personal attacks. Now, shall we begin, or would you like to continue giving me reasons to hold you in contempt?" Sterling sat down slowly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. He had expected to find another judge he could push around. Instead, he had found a wall he couldn't break through with money or threats. The real battle was about to begin. The evidence, the courtroom screens lit up with documents, contracts, and company records. Judge Thomas watched as her assistant organized the evidence against Sterling Industries. 3 weeks had passed since the first hearing, and what they found was worse than anyone expected. "Display evidence file 47B, Regina commanded. The main screen showed a map of Mars colonies, with red dots marking places where smaller transport companies used to operate. One by one, the dots disappeared, replaced by Sterling's company logo. "Mr. Sterling," Regina said, "can you explain why 23 transport companies went bankrupt in the same month? All after your company raised docking fees by 500%? Sterling sat back in his chair, looking bored. "Businesses. Business, Your Honor. They couldn't compete with our superior service." "Superior service?" Regina pulled up another document. According to colonial records, your prices are 8 times higher than the previous companies. Many colonists can't afford to visit their families on Earth anymore. The evidence kept coming. Emails showed Sterling's managers planning to buy patents just to keep them locked away. Video clips revealed unsafe ships being used for colony routes, while the good ones served rich tourists. Each piece of evidence made Sterling's smile fade a little more. Your Honor, one of Sterling's lawyers jumped up, these documents were private company property. They were stolen. Regina held up a hand. They were provided legally by company employees under whistleblower protection laws. Would you like me to cite the relevant statutes? In the public seats, people from Mars colonies watched with tight fists and angry faces. They had traveled for months to be here, using their life savings to buy tickets on Sterling's ships. Each one had a story about friends or family trapped by his high prices. Let's talk about the android incident, Regina said, bringing up a new file. The room got very quiet. Everyone remembered the news from 2 years ago, a whole android colony cut off from Earth because they couldn't pay Sterling's new rates. 300 people died waiting for medical supplies, Regina continued. Supplies that were sitting in Earth orbit because your company wouldn't transport them without payment in advance. Sterling leaned forward. The contract clearly stated the contract? Regina's voice could have cut steel. Did the contract mention that you blocked other ships from helping? That your company threatened to ban anyone who tried to reach Android Colony? She stood up, her robes flowing around her like dark wings. This isn't just about money anymore, Mr. Sterling. This is about lives. Human lives treated like numbers on a profit sheet. The screens filled with faces, people who had died waiting for supplies. Children who couldn't get medicine. Old folks who just wanted to see Earth one last time. Sterling finally stopped smiling. Your Honor, he said quietly, you're making this personal? No, Mr. Sterling. You made it personal when you decided your profits were worth more than people's lives. Regina looked at the colony witnesses. The court will hear testimony from Mars colony representatives tomorrow. Until then, we're adjourned. As people filed out, Sterling stayed in his chair, staring at the faces on the screen. For the first time in years, he looked worried. The evidence wasn't just attacking his business, it was showing the world who he really was. And Judge Thomas was just getting started. The threat Judge Thomas worked late in her office, reviewing witness statements from the Mars colonies. The sky outside had turned dark, and most staff had gone home. Only her desk lamp lit the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Her computer beeped. A message appeared, security alert, unauthorized access detected. Regina frowned. Someone was trying to enter the building's secure floor. The door opened before she could call security. Marcus Sterling walked in alone. He wasn't smiling now. This is highly improper, Mr. Sterling, Regina said, her hand moving to the emergency button under her desk. My office is closed. Let's talk, Judge. Just us. Sterling sat down without being invited. You have a lovely family. Your daughter just started medical school on Luna Base, right? Hard to get into that program. Would be harder if her scholarship disappeared. Regina's finger stopped just above the button. The room felt colder. Are you threatening my daughter, Mr. Sterling? Threatening? No. Sterling spread his hands. I'm concerned about her future. About your future, too. Judges who rule against me tend to have bad luck. Careers end. Families suffer. Accidents happen. Regina stood up slowly. In the dim light, her shadow towered over Sterling. Computer, activate recording. A small red light began blinking on her desk. You just made 2 mistakes, Mr. Sterling, she said. First, you threatened a federal judge. That's 20 years in prison. Second? She smiled. You reminded me exactly why this case matters. Sterling's face darkened. You're recording this? You think that matters? I own half the judges in the system. One call, and this recording disappears. Like the evidence against you disappeared? Regina pressed a button. The wall screen lit up, showing footage from Mars colonies. Or like these people disappeared? The ones who died because of your greed? I built the space transport industry. Sterling shouted, standing up. I made Earth great again. You're just a small-time judge who doesn't understand business. No, Mr. Sterling. I understand perfectly. Regina walked around her desk. I understand that power without compassion is tyranny. That wealth without responsibility is theft. She pressed another button. Security officers rushed in, weapons ready. Marcus Sterling, Regina said formally, you are under arrest for attempting to intimidate a federal judge. Add it to the charges. She nodded to the officers. Take him to holding. And make sure his lawyers know that bail is denied. As they led Sterling away, he turned back. This isn't over, Judge. You're right about that, Regina said quietly. But it's not going to end the way you think. Later that night, Regina called her daughter. Hey, sweetie. Just checking in? How's Luna Base? Great, Mom. But why are you calling so late? Regina looked at the city lights below her office. Just wanted to hear your voice. And to remind you that no matter what happens, we stand up to bullies. Always have, always will. Mom? Is everything okay? Everything's fine. Regina touched her grandmother's pin. Just doing what judges are supposed to do. Making sure justice works for everyone, not just the rich and powerful. The fight was getting dangerous. But Regina Thomas had never backed down from a fight that mattered. And this one mattered more than most. The message arrived at midnight. Judge Thomas's secure computer lit up with a simple text, check your private server. What you find will change everything. Regina hesitated before opening the file. Anonymous tips were dangerous, especially in high-profile cases. But something about this felt different. The files were massive. Test reports. Medical records. Ship diagrams. All marked with Sterling Industries' Secret Research Division logo. Computer, verify data authenticity, Regina commanded. The screen flashed green. These documents were real. What she read made her blood run cold. Sterling's company had developed a new faster-than-light drive 5 years ago. But instead of testing it properly, they had installed it in regular colony transport ships. The passengers had no idea they were test subjects. The radiation from these experimental engines was invisible but deadly. Colony hospitals reported strange illnesses. Children born with problems. Workers getting sick for no clear reason. Regina's hands shook as she opened more files. The company knew about the dangers. They had data showing the radiation effects. But the new engine was cheap to run, and profits were high. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown. Judge Thomas? The voice was distorted. I'm the one who sent the files. I worked in Sterling's research division. What they did. What we did. People need to know. Why now? Regina asked. Why come forward? My daughter. The voice cracked. She lives in Mars Colony 7. Last week, she was diagnosed with radiation sickness. That's when I knew I helped poison my own child. Regina looked at her screen. I'll need you to testify. They'll kill me. We'll protect you. But these files alone aren't enough. The court needs a witness. Silence filled the line. Then, okay. But not just me. There are others. Engineers, doctors, safety inspectors. We all knew, but we were scared. Now we're ready to talk. The next morning, Regina called an emergency session. The courtroom was packed when Sterling arrived, looking confident as usual. New evidence has come to light, Regina announced. The screens lit up with technical diagrams. Sterling's face went white. These documents show that Sterling Industries knowingly used dangerous experimental technology on civilian ships. Regina's voice carried to every corner of the room. The company traded people's lives for profit. Sterling jumped up. Those are corporate secrets. This is industrial espionage. No, Mr. Sterling. This is evidence of criminal negligence. Regina looked at the colony representatives. Your ships weren't just overpriced. They were killing the passengers. The room exploded with shouts and cries. Parents held their sick children. Workers touched their radiation burns. Everyone finally understood why their friends and families had been getting sick. Your Honor, Sterling's lawyer started, but Regina cut him off. The court will hear testimony from Sterling Industries employees tomorrow. Former Research Division staff are already in protective custody. She looked directly at Sterling. I suggest you spend tonight talking to your lawyers about a plea deal. As Sterling was led out, Regina touched her grandmother's pin again. The truth always comes out, she whispered. No matter how deep it's buried. The real fight for justice was just beginning. The Alliance Dave Wilson waited in the shadows of the courthouse parking garage. His hands kept touching the data chip in his pocket, making sure it was still there. After 15 years as Sterling's head engineer, he had finally gathered enough courage to do what was right. Judge Thomas's car pulled up quietly. She stepped out, followed by 2 security officers. Mr. Wilson? She called softly. You're safe here. Dave walked into the light. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and tired eyes. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out the data chip. Everything's here. Test results, employee records, medical reports from all 12 colonies. Regina took the chip carefully. You understand the risks? Sterling won't let this go easily. I helped build those engines, Dave said, his voice breaking. I knew they weren't safe, but I stayed quiet. Kept taking his money. Now people are dying because of what we did. Inside her office, Regina and Dave watched as the new evidence appeared on her screens. Thousands of documents, each one worse than the last. Safety warnings that were ignored. Workers who disappeared after speaking up. We need more witnesses, Regina said. People from the colonies who can testify about the health problems. Dave nodded. I have contacts. Good people who want to help but are scared. Give me 48 hours. I'll get them here. How? Regina asked. Sterling controls all colony transport. Dave smiled for the first time. Not all of it. Some of us have been busy. He showed her another data chip. Remember those small companies Sterling crushed? Their pilots didn't give up. They've been running a secret transport network, helping sick people get to Earth for treatment. Regina's eyes widened. An underground railroad in space? Exactly. We can bring witnesses from every colony. People Sterling thought he had silenced forever. Over the next 2 days, ships started arriving quietly at small, private spaceports. Colony workers, doctors, engineers, all carrying evidence of Sterling's crimes. Each one found their way to Regina's office, adding their stories to the growing pile of evidence. He's going to fight back hard, Dave warned. Sterling has spies everywhere. Let him try, Regina said firmly. The truth is like gravity, you can fight it for a while, but eventually it pulls everything down. Dave looked at her curiously. Why are you doing this? You could have an easy life, just looking the other way like other judges. Regina touched her grandmother's pin. Because someone has to stand up. Because every person, whether they live on Earth or Mars or anywhere else, deserves justice. Together, they worked through the night, preparing for what would be the biggest legal battle in human history. A judge who believed in justice and an engineer who found his conscience, working to bring down the most powerful man in the solar system. The odds were against them. But sometimes, that's exactly when justice works best. The attack. The morning news screens across Earth and Mars lit up with Sterling's face. Judge Thomas is trying to destroy humanity's future in space, his voice boomed. She doesn't understand progress. She's stuck in old Earth thinking. Regina watched the attacks from her office. Every channel showed the same message: she was too Earth-focused, too traditional, too afraid of new technology to judge space matters properly. Look at her record, Sterling's lawyers said on the news. She's never left Earth. How can she judge space business? She's threatening thousands of jobs, threatening our economy. The attacks got personal. News sites questioned her qualifications. Some suggested she got her position because of quotas, not skill. Others dug into her past, trying to find anything to use against her. Your Honor, her assistant called through the intercom. There are protesters outside the courthouse. Regina looked down at the street. People held signs saying "Save our jobs" and "Earth First." Sterling's media campaign was working. Her phone buzzed. It was Dave Wilson. Judge, turn on Channel 7. She did. Her heart stopped. The screen showed her daughter on Luna Base, being followed by reporters. How does it feel having a mother who's trying to destroy space travel? They shouted at her. Regina's hands tightened into fists. Sterling had crossed the line. Dave, she said quietly. Release the medical records. All of them. Are you sure? We were saving those for now. People need to see the truth. Within an hour, new images filled the news. Children in colony hospitals, sick from engine radiation. Workers with burns and cancer. Real people, real suffering, all because of Sterling's greed. The crowd outside the courthouse changed. Colony families arrived, holding pictures of sick relatives. Workers showed their radiation scars. The truth was fighting back against Sterling's lies. Regina called her daughter. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. Those reporters don't scare me. Her daughter smiled. Actually, some of my classmates are organizing a protest supporting you. Luna Base Students Against Corporate Crime. Regina felt proud. The attacks had backfired. Instead of turning people against her, Sterling's media campaign was showing everyone exactly why this case mattered. That evening, she addressed the media for the first time. Mr. Sterling thinks he can win this case on television instead of in court. He's wrong. Justice doesn't care about public opinion. It cares about truth. She held up medical records. This is the truth Mr. Sterling wants to hide. This is why we're fighting. Not for ratings, not for politics, but for people. The next morning, different signs appeared outside the courthouse. Justice has no borders and protect our colonies. Sterling's media attack had failed. The truth was winning. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Thomas stood. Today would change everything. This court has heard Mr. Sterling's media circus, she began. Now it's time for facts. She pressed a button, and the room's screens lit up. The first image showed a young girl in a Mars colony hospital. Emily Roberts, age 8. Radiation sickness from riding Sterling's ships to school. Another image appeared. Her classmates. 37 children, all sick from the same cause. Sterling shifted in his seat. His lawyers whispered urgently to each other. Your Honor, we object to these emotional displays, one lawyer said. Objection denied. These aren't displays. These are victims. Regina's voice was steel. And we're just getting started. For 3 hours, she presented evidence. Company emails showing Sterling knew about the radiation. Safety reports he ignored. Secret bank accounts used to bribe inspectors. The law is clear, Regina continued. Space transport companies must protect passenger safety, must provide fair prices, must allow competition. She looked at Sterling. You broke every one of these laws. Not by accident. Not by mistake. By choice. Dave Wilson took the stand next. I helped build those engines, he said. Sterling told us speed was everything. Safety didn't matter. When workers got sick, he paid them to keep quiet. More witnesses followed. Colony doctors described mysterious illnesses. Transport workers showed their radiation burns. Parents told stories of sick children. Sterling's lawyers tried to fight back. They quoted regulations, cited technicalities, made legal arguments. But they couldn't fight the truth. Mr. Sterling, Regina said, you had a choice. You could have built safe ships. Could have charged fair prices. Could have helped humanity reach the stars together. She shook her head. Instead, you chose profit over people. The evidence was perfect. Every document verified. Every witness credible. Sterling's empire of lies was falling apart in front of everyone. This isn't just about one company, Regina told the packed courtroom. This is about who we are as a species. Are we taking greed and corruption into space? Or are we building something better? She looked at the colony families in the audience. Law exists to protect people. All people. Whether they live on Earth, Mars, or the farthest colony. That's not Earth thinking. That's human thinking. Sterling finally understood. He couldn't buy his way out. Couldn't threaten or lie his way free. Justice had caught up with him. The courtroom buzzed with energy. Everyone knew they were watching history happen. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was humanity choosing its future in space. And Judge Regina Thomas was leading the way. The turning point. Sterling's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Major investors were calling, one after another, all with the same message: they were pulling out. Our shareholders are concerned, the Mars Investment Bank president told him. The evidence is too strong. We can't be connected to this scandal. In his private office at Sterling Tower, Marcus Sterling watched his empire crumble. Stock prices dropped every hour. Business partners canceled contracts. Even his oldest allies were running away. Judge Thomas had done what seemed impossible. She had shown the world the truth, and now everyone was choosing sides. Sir, his secretary called through the intercom, the board of directors is waiting in the conference room. They're demanding an emergency meeting. Sterling straightened his tie and walked to face them. The boardroom, usually filled with yes men and supporters, now held angry faces. These people had gotten rich from his company. Now their wealth was disappearing. The company has lost 40% of its value in 2 days, the board chairman said. Major colonies are canceling their transport contracts. We need to consider stepping down, Mr. Sterling. Step down? Sterling laughed, but nobody joined him. This is my company. I built it. And now you've destroyed it, a board member said. Those sick children. The radiation. How could you hide this from us? One by one, board members announced their resignations. They didn't want to go down with Sterling's sinking ship. Back in her office, Regina watched the news. Sterling Industries stock crashes. Board members resign. Colony transport crisis looms. Dave Wilson rushed in. Judge, you need to see this. He handed her a tablet. More whistleblowers were coming forward. Company secrets poured out like water from a broken dam. The truth has momentum, Regina said quietly. Once it starts moving, it's hard to stop. Her phone rang. It was the president's office. Judge Thomas, Sterling's lawyers want to discuss a plea deal. Regina smiled. Tell them it's too late for deals. Justice isn't negotiable. Outside her window, protesters still gathered. But now they carried different signs: "Thank you, Judge Thomas," and "Justice for the colonies." Sterling's empire was falling, but something better would rise from its ruins. A future where space travel served everyone, not just the rich. Where progress didn't mean sacrificing lives for profit. The turning point had come. There was no going back now. Justice Beyond Earth Part 10, the verdict. The final day of the trial arrived. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Colony representatives sat in front, their faces tense with hope. Behind them, reporters from every planet and station waited with cameras ready. Sterling sat alone at his table. His lawyers had advised him to skip the verdict, but his pride wouldn't let him hide. He still wore an expensive suit, but his face looked tired and old. Judge Regina Thomas entered the room. The usual all-rise call seemed louder today, more important. History was about to change. "Before I deliver my verdict," Regina began, "I want to remind everyone why we're here. This isn't just about business laws or transport regulations. This is about human lives." She touched her grandmother's pin for strength. "Marcus Sterling, please stand." Sterling stood slowly, his legs shaking slightly. The mighty space baron finally looked afraid. "This court finds you guilty of all charges," Regina announced. "Criminal negligence. Illegal monopoly practices. Endangering colonial citizens. The evidence is overwhelming." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your sentence is as follows. First, Sterling Industries will be dissolved. All transport ships and stations will be placed under emergency colonial administration until a new system is established." Sterling's face went white. His life's work gone in a sentence. "Second, all company patents are released to the public domain. The technology you hoarded will now benefit everyone. Third, your personal assets will be used to create a fund for colonial medical care. The people you hurt will get the treatment they deserve. Finally," Regina's voice grew stronger, "you will serve 20 years in prison. Not in a luxury cell, but in a standard colonial prison. You'll live under the same conditions as the people you exploited." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Colony families hugged each other, crying with joy. Years of suffering and fear were finally ending. "Transport is the lifeline of our space colonies," Regina concluded. "It can't belong to one person or company. It belongs to all humanity." As security led Sterling away, he looked back at Regina. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something like understanding. Dave Wilson approached the judge's bench. "You did it," he said quietly. "You really did it." Regina smiled. "We did it. Everyone who told the truth, who stood up against power, we all did it together." Outside, the sun was setting over New Washington. But in the colonies, a new day was dawning. A day of justice, of hope, of change. The verdict wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about choosing what kind of future humanity would build among the stars. The aftermath: 6 months after the verdict, the changes were everywhere. Sterling's arrest made headlines across Earth and the colonies. "Space Baron behind bars and justice reaches the stars." The emergency colonial administration worked fast. They fixed the dangerous engines, lowered transport prices, and opened routes to all colonies. For the first time in years, people could travel freely between worlds. Regina watched from her office as a new transport ship landed. It carried the Sterling Industries logo, but with a difference: the words "Public Transport Service" had been added below. "The first shipment of medicines reached Android Colony yesterday," Dave Wilson reported. He now headed the safety inspection team for all colony transports. "No more deaths from supply shortages." "How are the workers adjusting?" Regina asked. "Better than expected. Most kept their jobs, just under new management. And now they can report safety problems without fear." The medical fund from Sterling's fortune was working too. Colony hospitals got new equipment. Sick children received treatment. The radiation victims finally got help. Sterling himself adjusted poorly to colonial prison. The man who once owned the stars now shared a cell with common criminals. His appeals were denied, one after another. But the biggest change was in people's minds. The case proved that justice could reach anywhere, even into space. That no one was too rich or powerful to face consequences. Regina's daughter called from Luna Base. "Mom, you're in our textbooks now. The judge who changed space law. My professors use your case to teach ethics." Regina smiled. "Just doing my job, sweetie. Making sure the law works for everyone." The colonies were growing stronger. Without Sterling's monopoly strangling them, new businesses appeared. Innovation flourished as his hidden patents became public. Some said space travel would collapse without Sterling's control. They were wrong. It grew stronger, safer, more fair. Humanity's reach into the stars wasn't limited by one man's greed anymore. The judge's gavel had struck down an empire, but built something better in its place. The legacy. 5 years after Sterling's arrest, Judge Regina Thomas walked through the bustling public space transport terminal. Families from Earth and the colonies moved freely through its halls, no longer divided by wealth or status. The old Sterling Industries Memorial Hospital sign had been replaced. Now it read Colonial Health Center, treating everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Inside, the last radiation victims were finally recovering. Regina headed to Platform 7, where a special ceremony waited. The first completely public transport ship was ready for launch. Built with the shared knowledge from Sterling's released patents, it represented everything they had fought for. "Remember when this was all private property?" Dave Wilson asked, joining her at the viewing window. His hair had gone completely gray, but his eyes still showed the same determination. "Sterling would hate seeing this." "He can see it from his cell," Regina replied. "Maybe he's learning something." The new ship gleamed in the sunlight. Its name painted proudly on the side, Justice. Not a luxury cruiser, but a symbol of change. Regular people filled its seats, workers, students, families. Regina's daughter, now a full doctor on Luna Base, treated both Earth and colony patients. The medical scholarship program she'd helped create had trained hundreds of new colonial doctors. "Your Honor," a young girl approached Regina, holding a textbook. "We're studying your case in school. You showed us that one person can change everything." Regina smiled. "Not one person. Many people standing together for what's right." The ship's engines hummed to life, clean, safe engines that didn't harm anyone. Monitors showed similar ships launching from Mars, Luna Base, and every major colony. Space travel had become what it should have been from the start, a bridge connecting humanity. Final boarding call for Flight 777 to Mars Colony 1, the announcement echoed. "Regular service, all passengers welcome." Regina touched her grandmother's pin one last time. It had witnessed every moment of this journey, from the first confrontation to today's triumph. "The stars are for everyone," she whispered, watching the ship rise into the bright blue sky. "That's what justice means." High above, humanity reached for the stars together, no longer held back by greed or power. And in a courthouse office, a simple pin on a judge's robe gleamed like a distant star, reminding everyone that justice knows no bounds.